Thomas Whitfield drove his shovel into the earth and felt it hit something soft. He froze. The lantern in his left hand swayed, throwing wild shadows across the field. His breath came out in pale clouds against the cold autumn night. He told himself it was a root, a buried log, an animal that had crawled beneath the surface and died. He told himself a lot of things that night. He dropped to his knees anyway, set the lantern beside him, and dug with his bare hands. The dirt was warm, warmer than it had any right to be. And then the hand broke through the surface. Small, pale, fingers reaching upward like it was searching for something to hold onto. Thomas fell backward and scrambled away from it, his boots slipping in the dark soil. His heart slammed against his ribs. His mouth opened but no sound came out. He sat there in the dirt of his own field, staring at that tiny hand reaching out of the earth, and somewhere deep in his chest he felt the full weight of what he had done 13 months ago settle over him like a stone. Behind him, a voice said quietly, "The harvest is ready." He did not turn around right away. He already knew who it was. It had all started with hunger. Not the quiet, manageable kind that pinches at the stomach and passes by morning. This was the kind that hollows a man out completely, that strips away his pride and his patience and leaves behind something raw and desperate. Thomas had farmed the same stretch of land in rural Appalachia for 11 years. He had buried his wife on that land 2 years prior, in the small plot beneath the oak tree at the edge of the property. He had raised his daughter Alara there alone, getting her to school each morning and checking on the crops each evening, telling himself that as long as the land produced, everything would be all right. But the land had stopped producing. 3 harvests in a row had failed. The first time, a drought. The second time, a blight that swept through the county and took half the farms with it. The third time, Thomas never figured out what went wrong. The seeds went in healthy. The rains came at the right intervals. And still the crops came up brown and brittle and useless, and Thomas stood in the middle of his field in late September staring at the ruin of another year and felt something inside him quietly break. He sold what tools he could spare. He sold the second horse. He sold his wife's sewing cabinet, which he had always hated to look at anyway because it reminded him too much of her hands moving across the wood. None of it was enough. Alara got sick in October. The doctor came out from town, pressed his fingers along her throat and her wrists, listened to her chest, and then took Thomas aside and spoke in a low voice so the girl would not hear. "She needs medicine I don't carry," the doctor said. "You'll have to send to the city for it. And Thomas, do not wait long. She does not have the winter." That same week the bank sent a letter. 14 days until foreclosure. Thomas sat at the kitchen table that night long after Alara had fallen asleep. He sat there in the dark with the letter in his hands and the sound of his daughter's labored breathing coming through the thin wall between them, and he stared at nothing. He was not a man given to prayer. His wife had been the faithful one. But that night he pushed back from the table, walked out to the dead field under the full moon, and dropped to his knees in the dirt. "I would give anything," he said out loud. His voice cracked on the last word. "Anything at all. Please." The old man appeared at the edge of the field so quietly that Thomas did not hear him approach. He was tall and thin, dressed in a long gray coat that seemed too light for the October cold. His face was weathered but calm, almost kind, and his eyes caught the moonlight in a way that made them look faintly silver. "Thomas Whitfield," the man said. Thomas stood up slowly. "I don't know you." "No," the man agreed. "But I know you. I know about the harvests. I know about the letter from the bank. I know about the little girl inside who can't breathe right." He paused. "I know what you just asked for." Thomas's skin went cold. "What do you want?" The man tilted his head slightly. "I want to help you. Your crops will never fail again. Your daughter will be healed by morning. Your farm will prosper beyond anything this county has ever seen." He let that settle for a moment. "In return, I take only what grows beneath your soil that you did not plant. Nothing that belongs to you, Thomas. Only what is mine." Thomas looked back at the farmhouse. The faint glow of Alara's candle flickered in the window. "That's all," he said. "That's all." He should have asked more questions. He knew that even then, standing in the cold with the moonlight pressing down on him. But Alara's breathing had sounded so shallow that morning, and the letter from the bank was still on the table inside, and the field around him was dead in every direction. Desperation has a way of making a man's mind very narrow. It closes off the doors that caution would normally walk through. Thomas held out his hand. The old man took it. His grip was like ice. When Thomas woke the next morning, Alara was sitting up in bed asking for eggs. Her cheeks were flushed pink. Her eyes were clear. She said she felt fine, and when the doctor came back 2 days later to check on her, he stood in the doorway of her room for a long moment and then turned to Thomas and said, "I don't have an explanation for this." Thomas smiled and said nothing. The fields came alive as if the earth itself had been waiting for permission. By spring the soil was dark and rich and impossibly fertile. Neighbors who had stopped coming around suddenly appeared again, leaning on the fence and shaking their heads in amazement. The harvest that autumn was the largest the county had recorded in 40 years. Money came in steadily. Thomas paid off the bank. He bought medicine he no longer needed. He bought a new horse and new tools and a coat for Alara and a rug for the kitchen floor where the old one had worn through. Life was good. Life was better than good. But small things began to nag at him. Tools left in the field overnight would be found moved by morning, sometimes buried slightly, as if pushed into the soil from beneath. Strange circular depressions appeared in the dirt at irregular intervals, dark and perfectly round. One evening Alara stood at the kitchen window looking out at the field and said, very casually, "Papa, do you hear the singing?" Thomas looked up from his supper. "What singing?" "Underground," she said. "It sounds like a lot of people, very far down." He told her it was the wind. He told himself the same thing for the next 11 months. On the night of the first harvest moon since the pact, Thomas went out to check the fields and noticed that the ground was moving. Not shaking, not trembling, rising and falling slowly, rhythmically, like the chest of something enormous breathing in its sleep. He stood at the edge of the field and watched it for a long time. Then he got his shovel and his lantern and walked to the nearest dark circle and began to dig. The earth was warm beneath the surface. Then hot. He dug deeper and the warmth rose around him and the silence pressed in from every side. His shovel hit something soft. He knelt down and used his hands. The small pale hand broke through the surface and reached upward. Thomas scrambled back and sat in the dirt staring at it, and then the old man's voice came from directly behind him. "The harvest is ready. Thank you for tending to them." Thomas turned slowly. The man in the gray coat stood a few feet away, hands clasped behind his back, expression peaceful. "What is in my field?" Thomas said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Souls," the man said simply. "The ones who die alone. The wanderers. The lost. They are drawn here by the pact. Your land holds them until I am ready to collect." He paused. "You asked what grows beneath your soil that you did not plant. Now you understand." Thomas stared at him. "I didn't know. I never agreed to this." "You agreed to everything," the man said gently. "You simply chose not to ask." The silence stretched out between them. Thomas looked back at the farmhouse. Alara's candle burned warm and steady in the window. He thought about her voice asking for eggs on that first healed morning. He thought about the doctor's face in the doorway. He thought about his wife beneath the oak tree at the edge of the property and wondered, with a sickness that moved through him slowly, whether she had been the first. He turned back to the man in the gray coat. "How many?" Thomas said. The man smiled. "Enough." Thomas said nothing more. He picked up his lantern. He walked back across the field, stepping carefully, his eyes on the ground beneath his feet as if he were seeing it for the first time. He went inside. He bolted the door. He sat down at the kitchen table in the dark and listened to Alara breathing steadily through the wall. Healthy. Safe. Alive. He did not break the pact. Thomas Whitfield lived to 79 years old. The farm never failed. Alara grew up strong and bright and eventually moved to the city, married well, and had children of her own. Thomas died in his bed on a cold November night, respected by everyone in the county, remembered as a man who had turned hardship into something remarkable. But every year on the night of the full moon, the neighbors said you could see a light moving slowly through his fields. And every spring, no matter who owned the land after him, the soil turned itself in perfect dark circles without any hand touching it. Nobody asked why. Nobody wanted to know.